Now back to the Wisconsin Vegetable Gardener Radio Show, which is presented to you by Power Planter Earth Augers, the official digging tool to find the right size for your digging project. Visit powerplanter.com. Now here are your hosts, Joey and Holly Baird.
And let's get into some of the common problems and maybe some of the more extreme problems that people may face with their tomato plants this year. Many of us, if not all of us, have them in the ground. And there's going to be problems. It's not going to be plant them now, harvest them in 90 days, and everything's happy and go lucky. You're going to have some issues, and we need to be proactive instead of reactive with these situations.
Sure. So the first one we have here is early blight. And early blight, you have early blight because you'll get this yellowing of the bottom leaves of your tomato plant. If you don't do anything, that yellowing is going to spread. The leaves are going to die off. Pretty soon you just have like this stick with some tomatoes growing on it. So early blight is actually a bacteria that's in your soil. There's many good things in your soil. There's also many bad things. And early blight grows in everybody's soil. It just lives there. But what you can do is that since that early blight lives there and can get onto your tomato plants is because of the splashing up of water, rain, what have you, splashes on the tomato plant and causes that early blight issue. So there's a few things, different things that you can do. One is you can trim around the bottom of your tomato plants about 6 inches from, the bottom of the plant down
to soil level.
To the soil level, and you just go ahead, trim those branches off, and you would do this throughout the season as they grow and sprout there, and that helps part of it. Another thing you can do is take a handful of whole grain cornmeal and put that around the base of the plant. So you just want to get a little bit more than the cheapo kind. You want to get the whole grain.
Name brand.
Name brand.
Yeah. This is your tomatoes. These are your babies.
Right. They're worth it. You take a handful of that and you put it around the base of the plant. So you want to trim them, take this cornmeal, do that. And then finally you want to mulch. And mulch is going to help keep the moisture in. It's going to shade the roots of your plant, suppress weeds, and also prevents that splashing up. Now, when you're watering the plants, you can definitely water at the base of the plants or if you use irrigation, but Mother Nature doesn't care what your plants when it's raining. So that's why you want to mulch, and you can mulch with anything from straw, not hay, but straw. You can, if you have leaves that you collected from last fall, you can definitely use those, or you can use shredded paper. You can use pine needles, and you can use what we call is chemical-free grass clippings. So if you or somebody else is spraying your grass with some sort of persistent herbicide, do not use those grass clippings. We want to use just regular grass clippings, and you want to dry them out a bit before you use them as mulch, because if you don't dry them out, they could possibly mold.
And then if they're wet and then they dry, they'll clump together and the water can't get through them in order to properly water the plants. Now, even if you have a in-ground or ground level irrigation system, you still want to dry them and then place them on top of that irrigation system. You just don't want to throw the wet ones on there because of that fungal issue.
And you can just spread them on your yard or on your driveway, what have you. They'll dry quickly in the sun.
So trim the bottom 6 to 8 inches. Apply yellow whole grain cornmeal at the time of planting, and if you want to, halfway through the growing season, and mulch regularly to create a barrier of soil from the soil to the plant to reduce the splash up. Next one is leaf curl. Now, this may not be the more popular one, but curling of the tomato leaves may be a sign of a viral infection. Normally, this virus is transmitted through whitefly or through infected transplants. So if you got a transplant from a shoddy or El Cheapo garden center or back of a truck, this may be kind of the issue. Although physiologically the efforts for the tomato leaf curl does not ultimately affect the overall crop or the crop yield of the plant, when the tomato leaf curl, it is due to the viral infection. So we want to remove the infected part of the plant when necessary, if possible. Now, if the whole plant is infected, you can't just, you're going to have to remove the whole plant. You really want to look at the guidelines of no more than 25% of removal of leaves in order to help sustain and put the plant in a lesser of a shock. But if need be, you can remove, more than 25%. of the plant. The key to managing the leaf curl is through prevention. So as you see it happen, you want to continue to remove those infected leaves, and if need be, protect the plant with a floating row cover that will keep the whitefly invasion at bay. That type of thing. There's other things in which you can use in order to keep the plant somewhat healthy. But that's the main thing. If you see a leaf curl, it's something that you need to be aware of.
Okay, so then our third one is Blossom Enrot, and this is another
Right now,
issue.
it's a more popular one. It's one of the most popular ones on social media because tomatoes are being formed, and they're showing the black rotten portion of the bottom of the tomato, which is what is called Blossom Enrot.
So Blossom Enrot is the lack of access of calcium to your plants. It's not the lack of calcium in your soil necessarily. It's a lack of access that your plants are having. So what happens is that many of us plant our tomatoes. It's late spring. We get a nice rain. We keep getting a few nice rains. And then it doesn't start to rain for a while.
And a light rain doesn't mean a good rain.
No, we're talking about soaking rains. But you think, oh, well, I should probably water my plants, but it rained 2 days ago.
I'll get it tomorrow.
Pretty soon your plants are fruiting. You have that brown grossness on the bottom of your tomatoes, and it's because that calcium is locked up into your soil. But you go online and you read, do this, this, and this. You water your plants, and then it gets rid of that, and you think, oh, well, that must have been the solution. When all along, it was just watering the plants consistently to help keep all of those nutrients flowing nicely through the plants.
You have to have moisture in order to transmit the nutrients and the nutrients through the system of the soil into the plant. That's how it works. A dry soil does not allow the plant to uptake those things.
Then we also have late blight, and unfortunately, late blight does happen to the best of us.
We've experienced it once. It was in the November month because we had such a long growing season. Now, what late blight? It does happen later on in the season, hence the name late blight, and it infects your plant to where you have black and gray and brown spotches, not only on the stems and the limbs, but also on the fruit. And the fruit is inedible at that point, so you do not want to eat it. There is some ways in which you can be proactive in the prevention of late blight, and that's by copper fungicides you can spray. But however, if the plant has already been infected with the late blight, the copper fungicide that you spray on it does not work. It will not work. So if you do have late blight on your tomatoes, you want to get rid of them. You don't want to eat the fruit. And when I mean get rid of them, don't put them in your compost pile. Don't put them in the city's compost pile for municipality pickup. If you keep those spores warm enough over the winter months, then you will introduce that late blight into your garden far earlier in the growing season than what is traditionally in the garden later in the season. Now, Holly, how does late blight come into your garden? What are we touching something, or what is occurring that allows that late blight to get into the garden and start infecting not only our tomatoes, but it can be our tomatoes too, and occasionally the possibility of eggplants and peppers in that instance too, but predominantly affects the tomato portions of your garden.
Sure. So what happens is that it's spread through the wind. What occurs is that that's called infestants they either have survived over winter and then spread because of the wind. So if even if you get rid of your plants, put them in the garbage, and you have late blight, it doesn't mean that everybody's doing that. And then
you're the good gardener.
You're the good gardener, but maybe your neighbor is not, or not your direct neighbor, but maybe your neighbor, 5 miles away, because it spreads through the wind, and it typically goes through a county or a couple counties. And so that's why we want you to throw those plants away.
And our final one, Holly, is?
This is Septoria leaf spots.
This is known to be a very popular one for a variety of reasons. And how does one get this, and how does one treat this, Holly?
So it looks like basically you have these dark spots on your tomato leaves. And then eventually they fall off your plant. And this is a fungus. And this fungus is active from about 68 to 77 degrees Fahrenheit, and when the humidity is high. So we might not get it as much where we are, but other locations
now we're in zone
do.
5A, up in the southeast Wisconsin area.
But certain tomatoes are more susceptible, just depending on what the variety is. But what you can do is you want to make sure you're not using overhead irrigation, because that will, if it's humid where you are, that's going to increase the water or the humidity. And you just want to make sure that you are using, if you need to use a fungicide application, and then you would use that as like a foliar spray.
And then you don't plant the tomatoes in the same place year after year. At least a 3-year absence in a certain area for those tomato plants to be in that place. But also overhead watering. If it rains, it happens. But you don't want to incorporate and be part of the problem with that. Now
if you've had this issue before, and you live in an area with high humidity, make sure you're also spacing your plants.
Mm-hmm. Air circulation is key.
Yeah, air circulation is key. And that goes with anything that might get some sort of mold or mildew or fungus growth, like powdery mildew for viney squash and things like that. So you definitely want to make sure you're spacing them apart properly.
And if you are in an area where you have that high humidity, and there's places all over the country, talk to the local university, talk to the garden center, and go, hey, what do you recommend? Because there are worldwide, there's about 10,000 different varieties of tomatoes. Now, not all of them are commercially available, but however, different tomatoes grow better in different geographical areas. A tomato that does really good in South Florida, probably not going to do as well in northern Wisconsin or the Dakotas. So we want to keep that in mind. So those are 5 of about 10 billion different problems you can have with your tomatoes. So hopefully that has enlightened you a little bit in order to figure out what to be aware of, what to prevent, what to be proactive instead of reactive with.
For more information, please visit thewisconsinvegetablegardener.com.